Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today I'm going to be going over how you can apply a nice grungy texture to your 3D objects in Cinema 4D, shaded with Sketch and Toon to make it flat in 2D, and then to get back some of this nice depth by adding this grunginess that is actually applied based on the diffuse or the shading of your object, your 3D object in your scene. So the way I'm going to be doing that is using a shader that is actually part of Sketch and Toon called the Spot Shader. And Sketch and Toon is so deep. There's a lot of stuff to it. A lot of it's not very intuitive, but hopefully I'll help you kind of guide you through how some of this stuff works. I also mentioned in this tutorial, I'll be mentioning the cell shader. If you don't know much about it, I'm going to post a link to a previous tutorial I did that's all about the cell shader. And then, I have a bunch of other Sketch and Toon tutorials as well if you want to get into this nice flat 2D look inside of Cinema 4D. So let's just get started with how I use the spot shader in Sketch and Toon to apply this grungy material. Alright, so you can see we have our scene here, and everything is textured with this kind of grungy texture, except for this little pipe right here. So I'm going to go in, double click on the texture that's applied to just this pipe. And what we're going to do, and how I created this nice grungy texture, is actually using another shader that comes with Sketch and Toon. Now, Sketch and Toon is super deep. There's a lot to it, and if you go to the Sketch and Toon options here in this drop-down, you can see we actually have 4 shaders here. Now, I've discussed the cell shader in my previous tutorials. It kind of applies this nice quantized flat shading to your objects, but we also have these other options here. And the option that I'm going to go over today is this spot shader. And I'm going to apply that to the material and the luminance channel. And you can see that this is applying from the get-go this kind of like half-tone dot effect. And I have the mix mode set to multiply, so it's just multiplying on the color that we have selected in here. So that's just kind of a nice little setup to set that to multiply, and then you just have your underlying color underneath. So we're going to go into the spot channel here, and you can see that we have all these options. The first you'll notice is the shape. We have circle, diamonds, checkers, all this kind of stuff, and you can actually see what's going on up here. This is the shape that's being applied to our object, and it's actually applied in 3D space. So you can see that there's bigger dots and smaller dots, and they're mapped on based on this diffuse. And you can see that this is actually very reminiscent of the cell shader, where we actually have all these options down here as to how to shade. So we have shadow, diffuse, specular illumination, and then by adjusting the diffuse, you can see that that is kind of controlling where those large circles are being mapped on, and the white chip here is kind of mapping where the smaller dots are being mapped on, or nothing at all. So you can see you can constrain how the dots are applied by using this diffuse. And right now it's actually getting its diffuse values on our 3D geometry by using the camera as a light source. So that's on by default. So what we can actually do is use lights in our scene to drive the diffuse on or the shading on our 3D objects, and then therefore control how our diffuse is being mapped. So you can see that by changing it to lights, I can now move this diffuse value up, and you can see we're getting a little of our circles here. And you can see they're stretched, they're more oval-like. And what we can do is actually go to the scale and the U and the V and adjust just the V value here to make our circles, to make these circles a little bit less oval-like and actually like circles. So you can see that that's the the controls there, and you can actually adjust the rotation if you want, which I'm not going to really touch. So on the base level, that is what the spot shader does. But to get this nice grungy kind of noisy look, I didn't use the circle or anything like that. What you can actually do is go and use a texture. Now, once you use a texture, number one, you have to load in a texture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up a layer channel, and then I'm just going to apply a couple noise shaders here. And I'm going to choose this top one, and just overlay it on the bottom. So, a lot of these noises that you that you make, we're kind of accustomed to knowing exactly what a certain type of noise looks like, and it doesn't look very organic. It looks kind of like, oh, I know that's just the default noise, that's applied to it. So to get more organic looking noise, what I usually like to do is just double up or triple up or even more, just overlaying different noises on top of each other, so you can't immediately recognize like, oh, that's a booyah, booyah, yeah. So what I like to do is just kind of mix them up. So what I'm going to do is for this one, let's see, I'm just going to use a noise for this one. Just bring the scale way down. And you can already see we're getting kind of this grungy look right here. I'm also going to adjust the contrast all the way up. And the thing to keep in mind is that when you use a custom texture, that what is going to happen is it's the way that it's going to be mapped, the noise is going to be mapped onto your object is by the grayscale values. And the more contrast you have, the less there's going to be a gradual move from your noise to nothing. So what we can actually do is change this color to actually kind of constrain it to get whatever is light and about half gray. It'll be applied just like our smaller circles, so it would be more in the lighter values of our diffuse or shading on our object. So what I'm going to do with my second noise is actually make it a little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a different noise. I'm going to use this Voronoi 1, and then just bring the global scale up or down to 10. And then what I'm going to do is kind of adjust the brightness here to say, let's just see here, about -30. That looks good. So you can see that automatically, since this has a lot of the darker values here, so what we're doing is basically creating two noises, one that has white and light gray values, and that'll be a smaller noise, and then bigger, darker values, and I can actually move this to just be constrained to darker gray and black. And you can see that what we're doing is getting the darker noise being applied where it's darker on the object, because we're actually shading it with our lights in our scene. Our light is in this top right corner over here, and you can see that our lighter values on our object is getting applied that smaller noise. So hopefully that makes sense, because the stop or the spot shader shades based on contrast and grayscale values. So what we can actually do now is go into our spot color and our gap color. Gap color is just the color between the gaps of our noise. So you can see that I just made the white parts of our image darker. And then the spot color is actually what the color of our noise will be that we actually created. So we can actually lighten that up a little bit. We don't want perfect black, but you do want a darker value here. And then what we can actually do is go and adjust this diffuse now and actually control how our smaller noise and our larger noise are being mapped onto this object. So let me just see what's going on here. So remember I said that because our larger noise is actually middle gray and dark, like black, and that's what's going to be mapped on the darker parts of our diffuse, we can actually increase the noise scale here, and you can see that that noise is being scaled up around our edges here, and we're actually losing some of our smaller noise. So by keeping this relatively small, say 10% there, we're constraining the larger noise to just these edges, the darker parts of our object, and allowing for that lighter grays and whites values of our smaller noise here set to overlay in that middle part. So you can see if I make the noise smaller, you'll see right here some of those noise values being controlled there as well. So you can also control where it's mapped based on the brightness of each of these. So I can actually eat into part of our darker noise. So we're just controlling the dark and light values of our total noise here, and you can automatically see live feedback in our viewport there. So we're controlling the darker the values get, the darker that, or the more of this 3D object is going to be eaten up by this grunginess. So if we lighten up our values with our lighter noise, you can see that that's kind of constraining the darker, larger noise to the edges. And we can actually go into our noise right here and brighten or darken this up. Let's actually brighten it up. And you can see that now we're getting rid of a lot of that noise, and now it's just on the edges here. So it's all driven by grayscale values here, which is really cool because you can actually control how it's mapped onto your 3D image by using black and white values. So you can see that the darker I go, the more our noise is going to cover up there, up our lighter diffuse or lighter shading on our 3D object, and the brighter I go, the more we're kind of getting rid of the noise and constraining it to just the darker edges of our 3D object. And again, we're shading our 3D object by that light in our scene, so it's just an infinite light right there. So once you've got your noise looking pretty good as far as grayscale values go, you can actually go into the spots and then start messing with this diffuse value. So say you only want darkest edges constrained to just the very edge of your 3D object, you can just make a lighter gray chip here. And you can see that we're constraining just the noise to our edges, and I can bring the white value over and kind of get more of a solid color in the middle here. So this is all really cool, and using the spot shader, we're applying the noise and grunginess to our object if we want more grunge all over our object. And you can see on this actual sphere here how it's gonna preview before you actually see it applied to your actual object. We can actually add specularity here to kind of brighten up parts of this values here, but I really don't use it all that much. But yeah, so we can go, let's see. Say we want to get less of that noise right here. We can go into our noises and just kind of brighten everything up. You can see that we're getting rid of those little noise values here, so we're just getting solid color and then noise around the edges. So all controlled by the contrast and the black and white values of our noises that we chose. We can actually just go in here, and if you just want to use one noise, you can do that too. So you can see the difference between adding two noises. So I'm adding a lighter noise on top of it, just overlaid on top, and so you're getting this nice more organic type of noise. So that's basically it, and how I applied the noise to my objects using the spot shader in Sketch and Toon. And it really adds a lot to a flat scenes. You add a little bit more texture, a little more stylistic, flat object kind of design. And I really like playing around with this a lot. And again, you can control how this is mapped totally by kind of if you want to adjust the light in your scene. So let's go, and so I have my light up here. Let me actually zoom out. So I got a light right up here, and I'm actually controlling how everything's shaded based on my light now, because with that light we're changing the shading on our object, and then therefore our noise is then being changed as well. So as I angle this a little bit higher, you can really see how things are being changed. So that's just driven by the diffuse. Again, if you don't even want to use a light and you just want the camera to be your main light source, you can actually do that. And so it'll actually shade straight on just like that. So very cool stuff in the spot shader. Again, that is in Sketch and Toon. And if again, it works like if you're not familiar with the cell shader that I discussed earlier, that is another part of this the whole Sketch and Toon shaders. Definitely go and check out my previous tutorials on that, and I'll post that in the tutorial description. But hopefully that made sense. If you have any questions, hit me in the comments. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next tutorial. Bye, guys.